Thank you very much, Kerry. It's good to do house rules. Thank you everybody today for joining us. It's great to have so many people here. I suspect you're all used to these virtual meetings after the last year or so now. So I'm going to keep this short and sweet so we can get down to the interesting bit. Just a quick sort of 30-second background on myself and Felinesoft. As Kerry said, my name's Ralph Johnson. I've been the managing director of Felinesoft, I think, for well over 20 years now, showing my age. What have we done in those 20 years? We've helped an awful lot of people, and the name has changed over the years, but the essence of what we do is we help smooth their processes. We're greatly focused inside of the membership and charity sector these days. We'd probably summarize that as the not-for-profit sector. That kind of runs across everything from membership, charity and unions, and anybody who kind of deals with the public and subscriptions in some form or shape or form. You can see from on screen some of the clients that we've hung out with over the years. Mostly the technology that we work with is Dynamics, Umbraco, and mostly around the Microsoft stack. I won't go into it in too much detail, but suffice to say, what it focuses on is customer experience and the end-to-end process that customer experiences. We deal with everything from the website to the CRM in the background, and indeed stretch out into even kiosks and mobile apps. And that's probably enough from me. Aaron, would you mind popping to the next slide for me, please? Cheers, and I'll hand over to Aaron, who'll tell you a little bit about himself.
Many thanks, Ralph. Thanks. Hello, good morning, everybody. Glad you could come along this morning. I hope you find the session useful. So what are we doing? I'm going to tell you a bit about who I am and why I'm talking to you in association with Felinesoft this morning. We've then got an item about working backwards from the benefits. And so this is, we'll have a chat at the end of it, but it's going to be a bit of me talking about a sort of approach that I take to project planning and basically getting an organisation to be honest with themselves. And I'll expand on that in a moment. Then we've got something about business architecture, which is a posh way of saying what does an organisation do and how does it operate, but crucially how wide it looks at that. So does it look at its operations in isolation in different bits, or does it properly look across the whole organisation? So we can discuss that as well, and I'll give some reflections. And then a question: does your project board realise it is them who are responsible for their project success? So I've got some quite good real anecdotes from there, which hopefully you'll find equally funny / really depressing. And then lastly, we'll wrap up with why the most important person on your project is the one who says they don't know what's going on. And I'm not being flippant or humorous there. I'm dead serious, and hopefully I'll give you some examples of why you should root those people out, because they can really help you in what you need to do. I should say at the start, all the sort of the examples and the anecdotes I'm going to tell you, they're all real. They're all real stuff, but I won't attribute them back to any particular organisations. And I think it's fair to say, of all the organisations I've worked with, even though I'm using some individual anecdotes, all of them and all organisations really behave these sorts of good and bad traits that I'm describing. So there you go. A bit about me. So I've worked in what Ralph was calling the NFP sector there for about 25 years. In the middle there, you can see some of the charities and then later membership organisations I've worked with. And over that time, I've been various things, from the very technical, like a DBA, a database manager, through to analysing how organisations work, running development teams, managing projects and programmes, and then more latterly, more into the director and the strategy side of things. Excuse me. So I'm not particularly hands-on technically anymore, but back in the day, I was really specialising in CRM, digital, and data. So why am I here talking to you? That's who I am. Why am I here? And so I should start by saying the reason I now know Felinesoft and I'm doing work with them is I'm running a change program at the BMA, and the first very important bit of that change program is CRM. So I met Ralph and the team through a CRM procurement process, which I believe I won't take this too badly. They've described as being brutal. And so I think off the back of that, they'd said, "Can you come and chat to a group of people about your frankly brutal approach to doing things, and to see if the way I do things a little bit differently is of interest to you guys." And so what does that difference entail? So I would say basically I tend to be very warts and all and honest with organizations when they start out on these transformative things, and I'll often talk to the senior team about putting a mirror up to themselves and saying, look, just chucking technology at stuff is not going to solve anything. You need to have a really honest look at yourself about what you do well at the moment and what you don't do well. And if you can't solve those things, that if you're really honest, you don't do very well, or you're not willing to put the effort into solving those things, then forget doing the transformation program, because the generally transformations start with rooting out the internal things before you start adding tech and new stuff to them. And so connected to that, there's me saying it's calling out a disconnect between the leadership and those who are actually doing the work. And I don't mean anything, there's nothing malicious there. Most places suffer from this, big and small, but it's again just getting that leadership to have an honest look at what they profess is the right thing to do. How much have they actually stress tested that with the people on the ground that are doing stuff? And then lastly, I tend to like to wash my dirty linen in public when it comes to projects and programs. I can't stand a project which keeps being reported as rag all green and everything going fine, and then invariably at the end, it's all a bit of a disaster because people weren't being overly honest in how they were reporting progress. So I'm a big fan of just wearing your heart on your sleeve, getting the senior managers and project people to say, look, let's just be really honest about how things are going, and if we need to put the brakes on, change what we're doing, be honest, be open, don't just keep presenting progress for the sake of it. So I think that's why Felinesoft want me to talk to you today, because they sort of had the sharp end of some of that through the procurement process, which I'll be interested, if we get time, Ralph and Harpreet, I'd like to understand what you mean by brutal and see if I can change that a bit. But overall, this is what I would describe as working backwards from the benefits. This is having a really honest look at what an organization wants to change and what they then need to change about themselves. And that's really the topic this morning. It's delving into that. So I'm not completely brutal, and it's not all about work. When I'm not doing that, I like to play with my cats Ginny and Basil. I like to write acid house tracks when I can get to my drum machine, which is under my cat there. I like to ride my bike. I like to listen to old silly music by people like Rick James, and I like books by people like Saul Bellow. So there you go. There is the human bit, the bit at the bottom of the CV that says, and this is me in a nutshell. So there you go. It's not all brutal work. On to the first topic. So working backwards from the benefits. Over here on the left, you've got this could variably be your leadership team. It could be a management consultancy who've come in to tell your leadership team what to do. Or if you're from a membership organization, it could be your elected members, or it could be someone like me, a strategy change program. So there we are on the left in our high and mighty ivory tower. We're at the controls of some big strategic thing, and we think we're all knowing, and we think we know what we're doing. And what these functions tend to do, again, this is a little bit unfair, but I'm going to be unfair as we go throughout this process to make some points. What this function tends to do, in my humble opinion, is they tend to come up with statements like this. So they work away on their strategies and their change programs, and they come up with these things that sound great in isolation to our super beings around the table there, and they come up with things like putting our beneficiaries first. Why would you not do that, I guess, is my question to that. And they say things like maximizing our ability to be the best we can be. Well, isn't that just saying we're going to do our jobs properly? So those first two there, those are real. I've seen those written in strategic documents from organizations. Here's a more recent one from a political party last week, Britain in the world. There you go. If anyone can tell me what that means, please let me know. And then this one at the bottom, synergizing our business alignment to digitally leverage our success. I've made that up, but I would bet you that combination of words, possibly in a different sequence, has probably turned up on some marketing slide deck somewhere at some point. And it's just nonsense, really. I mean, what does that mean to anyone? The point I'm making here is the stuff in the middle, people can be in a bit of a bubble, in a bit of an echo chamber up at the strategic end of things in organizations, and they can come up with stuff like this, which they think actually means something. And then it gets chucked out into the sort of the vast chasm between the very top of an organization and its strategic sort of direction and leadership, etc. It gets chucked out, and then it's supposed to land with those that actually do the work in organizations. So these are the people who they are responding to that complaint by a member. They are getting stressed because the direct debit run on their system doesn't seem to be working. They're the ones who are actually living this day in and out, doing the practicalities of running an organization. And when someone from the top comes along and says synergizing our business alignment to digitally leverage success, it's frankly a bit meaningless. And so what I'm interested in, let me forward this on a bit. What I'm interested in is, why does that end up happening? How do we get that disconnect? Why do we have people in an echo chamber coming up with these statements that don't really mean a great deal? And my theory on that is that what leaders tend to do, whether they are of the permanent sort or they are brought in from outside to advise, etc., what they tend to do is they focus on the journey and not the future state for an organization. So if you notice those made up, well, not made up statements I was just talking about, it's all about getting somewhere. It's all, we will be the best at, we will do this, we will change, we will transform. It's all about getting somewhere and being better. But if it just said something like, in the future, our members will be able to do these things. In the future, our donors will be able to see this information. It doesn't sound as flash. It's just statements of what the future could look like for the organization. But my bugbear and my theory here is that means a hell of a lot more to people within the organization and people outside your organization than saying things like, we will synergize to be the best that we can be. So what do I do? If I get into an organization and that tends to be the culture, what do I do when I'm trying to start up something transformative? So step one here, I tend to get the powers that be to describe a future state, and I say to them, look, you can't mention projects, processes, cultures, or your own aspirations. My department would be brilliant. And really crucially there is you can't talk about things passing through time. You can't say we will become better, we will strive to blah blah blah. You have to just say what it's going to be like for your stakeholders or your members in 1, 3, 5, 10 years time, to talk about what that future looks like. So that's the first step. And then when I've got that, I ask those leaders to switch off their own ambitions. So this is a two hats thing. This is about saying to a group of people, look, you have one hat, which is the thing that you want out of an organization, the progress that you want your department or your group to make, etc. And I'm asking you to switch that off, and I'm asking you to look at this set of future state definitions that you and your fellow leaders have come up with, and I want you to step out of your shoes and into those of your members or your customers, your donors or whatever, and I want you to have a think about what you think in their shoes would be the most priority thing to do for their benefit. So again, don't think about what when you get to this point, what tends to happen is people say that could never happen because that would mean changing our organization in this way, or it's restructuring my team in that way, etc. And so this is where I tend to say, stop doing that. Don't wear your own hat. Wear one that's about where you think the organization could go to, regardless of what would need to change, for the best benefit of those on the outside. And when I say customers, sorry, when I say not the organization, I would include within that committees for those membership people listening. So once you've got your leaders frankly uncomfortable and thinking in a way that they're not used to and that they don't necessarily like to, the other end of this, and this is the business architecture bit really, is talk to the workforce, get down on the ground and have a really warts and all chat with them about what is and isn't working, and what they think needs to change, whether that's processes, structure, culture, etc. And this is a real thing. I've had some complaints about this, but heads of and directors are not allowed in. So I've run these sessions at organisations, and I've had heads of say, but what if they say the wrong thing? What if they say something that isn't really, in line with where we're going. And I say, well, actually, that's what I need to hear, because if they are saying that, then they've just identified a problem that we need to know about. And this is possibly where some of that that brutality that Harpreet and Ralph and Co have fed back about the procurement process that I went through, particularly with them and the other people that were in our securement process. I had people in the room dealing with them very much from this end of things, who were willing to wear their heart on their sleeve and say, look, when we worked in the supplier, we've worked with CRM suppliers and others before, this is where they've let us down. You prove to us you're not going to do the same. So it's that warts and all, just expose yourself and be honest about things that I feel gets the best results. And then finally, it's taking these two findings back to the leadership. And this is where you start really eking out what the true benefits are. You have an idea of saying, well, this is where you as a leadership function, if you're honest about putting yourself in your customer's shoes, this is what they're saying is the most valuable things to do. And then we've got some real hard truths from your workforce about saying what they think needs to change and how that links with these things that you are perceiving will be in the most interest of your customers and donors and so on. And you play this back and you say, well, if those are the benefits, leadership, here are the things that are seriously going to stop that happening. And if you don't change those things, you're not going to be able to reach these aspirations. So it can be a bit of a glass half empty moment with them. But for me, it's so important to say those benefits will not be reached by just committing some money to a project or committing some money to putting a new piece of tech in. You have to prove to the transformation people that you're serious about changing some of these cultural and structural things in the organization, or we shouldn't move forward. And yes, it's a bit of a difficult message, but for me, it's absolutely the place to start. So that's me. I'd be interested now on the wider, the group here. Is there any truth in that? Has anyone tried anything like that? Where does your organization start? Do they start with the benefits bit? Do they have a sort of a hard look at what they might be doing wrong, or do they tend to think if I chuck some tech at this, it will solve things? And where I say here, is anyone tasked with looking horizontally? So it can be quite hard to go up to a bunch of divisional directors within an organization and say, have you spoken to divisional director X about this thing that isn't working between the two of you? Is anyone doing that? Is anyone biting off that hot potato? So there you go. That's my first round. I'm going to come out of presenter mode so I can join the group and see some faces. And yeah, really interested in your thoughts.
Thanks for that, Aaron. I'm just, whilst we're waiting for people to put their hands up, I just thought I'd add a couple of comments. I mean, we've certainly seen this in the past, and the disconnect that you can get from the people on the ground versus those in your excellently looking ivory tower. It is very true. I was once sat in a meeting with one of the directors of a company, and they eloquently described this process from start to finish. And then we took it to the team and we presented it to the people on the ground. And their first comment was, we don't understand or recognize that process at all. Now that actually meant that we could see great value, because there was what they thought was happening and what was actually happening. And that kind of explains some of the differences from the off. So we generated value before we'd even actually, done anything with the system at all, just by highlighting the differences in understanding.
Yeah, and I'd really, so I think, Ralph, the point I was making about where the heads of aren't allowed into those sessions, what that's really saying is, can you tell me what's really going on?
Yes.
Not the story that your boss insists you tell them because they like good news.
Yes, absolutely. And it is so important that you get the warts and all out, because it's finding those painful spots that is actually where the true value can come from. And sometimes you actually find the reverse. You actually find they're doing things that add great value that the management didn't know about, and you absolutely don't want to lose them. But enough from me. Anyone with any questions? No? Oh, I can see a hand up from John. John, do you want to pop your camera on, take yourself off? Go for it.
Hi, Aaron.
Hello, John.
That was really, really interesting. I was just wondering how you deal with, so presumably when you go back and present this stuff, you'll get some forward-thinking directors who think, that's great, I know something that I didn't know previously. Is it always unilateral, or do you sometimes get some people who are really positive?
Yeah.
Beneath them? Or, yeah, I think
Yeah. No, I hear you. Yes, of course. No, of course, you take it all back, and they go, "Oh, I'm completely fine with you destroying my empire that I've built up for years." No. In reality, John, no, there's a lot of. It's really varied. Everywhere is really varied. So some senior people are begging for this sort of message to be brought. Others will have structures that they genuinely have spent a lot of time building up, and they don't want anyone prodding around with what they've got. So what I tend to do is when you form a governance function, you effectively you have like a little job description for the people on that group. And so I use the term two hats there, but it's a real thing that I say to people. Yes, I know you're really senior, I know you know what's going on, etc., but the purpose of this program is going to require you to switch off how you behave in your directorial role, and it's going to ask you to be open to changing things. And over the course of this thing, you might well, and you probably will, find yourself in a position where your what I'm asking you to do on this board is in conflict with your day job, but you have to be grown up enough to deal with that and talk about it honestly. And if you can't deal with that, we can't have you on the board. Now, when I've said that to some people, so a lot of them, yeah, they're like, no, I can handle that. I can deal with that. I have had people who have joined under those circumstances. They haven't been able to behave like that, and I've had to say, if you can't behave like that, you can't be on the board. And they've said, well, okay, call my bluff then. And I've had to probably put a chief exec in a difficult position and say this person needs removing from this process. But that's how you have to play it if you're going to get it to work. So again, I guess it is back to this brutalness, but it's just honest. It's honest about why people are there and calling it out before you get too far down the line.
Thanks. Cheers. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Cheers, thanks, Aaron. I'm just noticing a comment from Lewis Varley in the chat, saying that he's got similar sort of challenges with stakeholders in Ivory Towers, that they tend to do business planning around it and come up with timescales before the delivery teams have had chance to input. And
isn't it always the way? I love that one. They ask, so all the doers do their plans, and all the supporters like HR, finance, tech, they get asked to come up with a plan at the same time.
Yes.
When they don't know what anyone's asking. So I've had that. So Lewis, yep, completely understand that one. And what I've done, and I mean, again, this plays back to Felinesoft and other agencies that when they say they do things agile, it's really serious. You do things iteratively. So you say, I can't tell you what my plan is until I've seen your plan. And you do, and it is hard because again, I will put my neck out and say, hands up who someone sent out the corporate plan to their organization and said, hooray, after 6 months of locking ourselves in a room, we've come up with this corporate plan. You flick through the first couple of pages and then you put it in your virtual drawer because it doesn't really mean anything to you or impact how you're going to work. That thing would be so much more readable if someone had come to everyone at the beginning and said, how are we going to do this together so it makes sense across the board? But people don't tend to do that.
No, it's very challenging. There is there's kind of a few sort of fallacies that we see with it. One of them is that the budget and the timeline is agreed, and then the job is to cram as much possible scope in because that's how you drive value. Now, that for us it just creates a conflict between the delivery team and the budget and the dates, because in the end, if you want more, it takes more effort. Whereas the agile approach sort of says, well, I'll give you a budget, I'll give you a timeline, but I want to stick to the quality, and we'll have a proper honest conversation about where the value is. In other words, we vary the scope.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, and I think certainly for my last two roles, I'd sort of given up any pretense of doing anything otherwise. And at the job
Yeah.
interviews, I was pretty candid in saying, look, if you're after someone that's going to give you good news, but at the end of the day, what you're looking for is to tick a box saying something was done on time and to budget.
Yes.
That's not me. So I'm very sorry, but from day one, I will bring problems to the table as well as solutions, and just ask people to be serious about the problems. And if you need to spend more time, if you need to change what you thought you set out to do, then that's what you do. Otherwise, it's back to that whole false sense of progress.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I totally agree. But I would say as well that sometimes agile isn't the best way. I do sometimes prefer a bit of waterfall, sometimes for the integration with accounting systems, for example. You tend to need to heavily spec those. But before we wander off into the theoretical
Agile.
world of methodology, I can see a question from Shan.
Hello.
Hi, Shan.
I just wanted to talk a bit more about the disconnect
Mhm.
between leadership and on the ground.
Yeah.
Something I've observed is, unfortunately, some of the people who apply for executive roles are just collecting titles. It's very, very, nominal, and their input is minimal. Their insight is limited. I guess, how do we encourage better candidates?
Yeah. That's great question.
And to hold them responsible, because really, all of the work, all of the strategic planning is done, within the back office team. They're too busy thinking about, their next ACCEA award or their own personal goals. So, I could really appreciate some help with holding.
No, I hear you, Shan. That's a really interesting point. And I'd say first thing, again, personal view, but I think organizational size plays a really big thing here. So where I've worked at organizations that are about 100, 150 staff, actually the management tend to be quite a bit more sort of switched on and aware. So put it this way: if you're at an organisation where it's just about possible for the chief exec to know everyone's name, those places tend to be run very openly. Where you start getting much bigger organisations, that's where I tend to see the disconnect. So it's that kind of somewhere between heads of and the top level, something just falls down.
Okay, what about the micro end of the scale then?
Yeah.
Because we're absolutely tiny.
Oh, okay. So again, personal view on this. What I've seen at tiny organizations is people tend to be given these massive job titles, which aren't really relevant to what they're doing. So you can have like a director of global strategic insight, and they've got one employee called assistant, and it just doesn't make any sense. I won't name the charity, but there's one I haven't worked at, but some people I know who are at many years ago, they had a restructure when a new chief exec came in, and they created this upended thing where there were more directors than there were heads of, and there was a bun fight across the directors to get heads to report into them, a bit like musical chairs, because the director didn't want to be the one with no one working for them. It's crazy. It's just completely crazy. And your question about what do you do to stop that happening? And again, this is, I think, some of the brutalness that Ralph would have felt through the procurement process. What I'm really a fan of doing is a kind of a simulation bit of a selection process where you're not just asking people to give responses to questions. You actually set a really thorny problem. And where I've sat in on interview panels for sort of more senior people, I really like this sort of saying to them, don't talk to me about strategy. Don't talk to me about how you will evolve as blah, blah. Here's a scenario where you've got two functions that report to you and they're completely at loggerheads. What are you going to do? And you just do really sort of stripped down scenario based. Here's a problem that requires you to roll your sleeves up and do some tough things rather than just telling me about how great we're going to be in the future. So that's certainly what I've done interviewing people, and it catches them out a bit, which is a good thing.
Yeah, unfortunately, our process is by election rather than by interview.
Oh, then that is a really hard one. So again, I have to be careful what I say here. But I have been asked by seniors at such organisations, what the hell can we do to solve this elected member who's just completely wrecking everything? And you go, well, you say this, and this, and they say, I couldn't possibly say that. They're an elected member, so you're completely stuck in the middle. And again, I've been brutally honest and called some things out, and it's such an interesting dynamic where fellow elected members kind of cough and look at their feet because they know it's true, but they don't want to talk about it. But you have to call it out, and ultimately, whether it's an elected member organisation or a charity, it's back to that thing I was saying of put yourself in the donor or the member shoes. You have an idea of what you think is right for them, but it's entirely subjective, so it's not as valid as you think.
I would add, I would add to that as well that a clearly defined role or responsibility for either for the project particularly is very helpful. If that's the more public you can make that, the easier it is as well with elected members, because you can double down almost on the transparency, which is if you want to be elected for this particular slot, then you will be fulfilling these roles and held to account that you are delivering on these roles. Just wanted to double check if we've got any final questions for this section before we move on to the next one. No, okay. Just gonna comment on a couple of things from the chat before we move on. Then, a note from Vic about the need for CTOs. I'd very much agree with that. The big commercial organisations that we work with, that some are outside the NFP sector, then they all have CTOs or CIOs, and they really do push the digital agenda within the boardroom, and that helps greatly.
That, if I can just quickly back to Shan's point, that's a trend I've seen is directors of IT can be renamed CIO or CTO as just part of a process, but it doesn't actually reflect a change in the job. So totally agree, they are very different things. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. Back to the presentation, Aaron.
Okay, so if someone could just call out, let me know, can people see something that says business architecture now?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, so here's our little ivory tower super beings controlling all the strategy at their organization. And I'm guessing, maybe do a hands up so Ralph and Co can see. Has anyone ever had a thing where someone senior says, let's start a project because it will solve all our problems? So there's a big disconnect between our processes. This team aren't working with that team properly. I know, let's throw a CRM system on top of that. Is that something people have had before?
I can see applause coming up and a question from multiple people. I think is it Kitty was potentially first in with the hand up there?
Yeah. So this is such a thing that seniors do, and this is really what I was getting at when I said, if you're bringing me in to tick a box to say something's been delivered, that's not going to solve your problems, because your problems are actually more beneath your feet and structural in terms of what you need to do. So that's really why I'm talking about business architecture here. So let me show you what that means in a traditional sense. So EA stands for enterprise architecture, for those that don't know, and what an enterprise architecture approach suggests is you look at all the processes within an organization, you then determine the applications that are needed to support those processes, and then you look at the data that is inside those applications, and then finally you look at the infrastructure that's holding and managing all of that data in the apps. So that's the traditional how you should approach things. Now, I'm going to be a bit cruel here, cruel to be kind. This is my experience of what happens when, in reality, if you give a project or you give a change thing to the business, they look at the apps first, i.e. let's put a CRM in because it will change what we need to do. And then they go, oh no, we didn't realize we're going to need to change our processes, because we're starting to find things as we speak to the people on the ground about implementing this new CRM. We're starting to find things that means we need to revisit our process. We couldn't just assume that the application is going to dictate that to them. And then finally, they look at the data bit. So that for me tends to what happens with the business. They get to the process, but they get through it problematically, and it becomes something to try and cover up and sort of paper over as they hurtle towards trying to implement an application. And the reason that I've squashed these compared to this stack on the left here is that is really what happens. The business get hold of something and they look at an application in the isolation of what they do, really not thinking about how that impacts on departments that relate to them. So a really obvious one there is if you're looking at a kind of a membership processing app, they don't necessarily look at the events and the recruitment that is leading to the input to that group, and they don't tend to look at the connection out to people like the finance team who need to run subscriptions. So there can be a very narrow view of things, which just causes more problems as you get further down the chain, particularly as you look at other teams' processes. Now I'm in IT, so forgive me any IT people on this call. Again, cruel to be kind. Traditionally, if you give something to an IT function, and this goes back to Ralph's point, if this isn't a CTO or a CIO, this is your humble old IT director. They tend to start by saying, well, what's the infrastructure question? What's the scope of the apps and the things that we're going to run? And they look wide. It's good. They look wide. But then they look at the apps that are running within that infrastructure and they start narrowing it down a little bit to who's asked them for something. So they start losing that wide business question. And then that narrowing down happens again on the data. Now, they do look broadly at the process, but what they're doing is they're not facing this same kind of issue that the business has. It's the process is sort of assumed to be right. So IT tend to say, okay, the business say that they need an app, or they must have all of their processes sorted out. So we don't need to challenge that. We'll just, we'll just assume they're all right, and off we go. Now, this is what I find works. Doesn't work everywhere, doesn't work all the time, but this is what I find works for me on this, is if you start with that benefits bit. And that's that thing about getting your seniors to be really honest about what they want to change and what they can and they can't change. When you go back to them and you say, okay, you want, for example, you want a brilliant personalization experience for your members joining on a portal. Well, okay, in order to do that, before we look at technology, let's get you to get all of your staff tagging every bit of content that they do in a new way across different directorates, because unless you've done that, there's no point having a personalization portal. And that's the point where the seniors tend to go, oh, I didn't realize we'd have to do that. Let me have a think about that. So when you've got your true benefits, what do we really want to aim for that we think are achievable? That's when you go down and you look at processes and you look at them as broad as possible. So even if you're just putting an app in, which is for your finance team or it's for your membership team or whatever, you look at the processes, and particularly with CRM, it tends to start in organizations as one team, but it's not long before someone says, wow, this thing could work across the whole organization as a sort of a glue to pull us all together. It always happens. So it's best to start out from the beginning to have that really broad process check-in with people to say, even if you feel distant from this at the moment, what's it likely to mean to you in years to come? And so, my version of that at the BMA, we're very much looking at replacing a membership case management system, but in a few years, that is going to be driving and automating and running our committee collaboration systems. So even though our committee people are a year or so away, I'm talking to them about what that means and bringing them into the conversation. So when you've got a clear picture of those processes, you're down then looking at the apps, and apps and data, they're so intrinsically linked these days. So from the app side, you'll get people saying, I want all of this information captured because it will drive these other things. Sorry, from the data side. From the app side, you get the people that are doing the work real time saying, well, look, if I ask that many for that much information, a member's just going to hang up before they've got to the end of the application process. So that kind of relationship between apps and data is really important. And for me, I try and run those side by side. And then, of course, you're looking at the infrastructure. But in these days of AWS and O365, etc., it's such a different question to what it used to be in the past. So there you go. That's my thoughts around business architecture, and really, taking it away from that rather hoity-toity sounding word, it's ask as many people as possible to be honest about how they work and what they think needs to change to work better, before you start looking at the tech. So I'll come out of the presentation there if we want to move over to some questions. Again, do you recognise what I'm saying? Would this sort of approach work at your organisation, or are those sort of silos just impregnable? If you tried smashing those silos, would it cause more problems than it would solve?
Just whilst you muster up your questions and have a little think about that, I'll add a little bit of sort of the implementer's view to it. The challenge that we often find is the information flow, and that works really well with what Aaron's just said. The information flow needs to be traversing up and down and across the organization. So as Aaron talks about how wide you view a process, if you just view the process, for example, in your membership, then that's going to use a payment process, for example. Now, that clearly ends up needing to be a conversation, possibly with people in fundraising, possibly with people in finance. So it's really important that when you're thinking about the business architecture that you put together, that you're focused on collaboration across the different silos. That we find really helps when we're doing process design, because it means that people see stuff. One of my favorite little phrases is we think better together. And that really is true, because you'll put something up from one person's perspective of a process, and somebody else will come in and go, ah, yes, but, and then together you refine that process and you make it work. And that process alone of being able to work together on the process starts to break down those silos, starts to mean that the data becomes connected from the different silos, making the whole system easier to use.
Yeah, for sure.
And anyone want to chip in? No.
I mean, even if I'd be interested, Ralph, if anyone, how do you tend to start projects in your organisation? Does someone say, oh my goodness, that bit of technology is about to break, we better replace it? Or does someone say, we think in a procedural way we could work better? Let's see if there's some tools that could help us with that, because they're two very distinct, bottom up, top down, respond to emergency or respond to opportunity type approaches. Or if people don't want to show their hand.
I've got a question on the chat, Aaron, where we're being asked about the scenario where it's difficult to define the benefits, and essentially you want to play with well integrated functional kit. Essentially, you want to see what it can do. Yeah. Now it is a distinct challenge that if you're working with legacy kit, it's really very challenging to be able to know just what the modern kit can do. So the way that we tend to approach that is we tend to say, well, tell us where your pain is. Yeah. If you do, we run a bit of a process called a stakeholder interview, which doesn't ask anything about what the benefit is. It doesn't ask for any of that. It's almost a detectionist, to steal the name of a program. Little exercise where you say, what's your day job is our opening question. Yeah. We document the current process, and when we've documented, we say, where's the pain? Now, when someone tells you where the pain is, that often tells you where the benefit is, without asking the question, what do you want the system to do? Because if you ask, what do you want the system to do? Another nice little quote, they'll tell you they want the same thing, but they want it to work. And if I like to misquote Henry Ford, he said, if I'd have asked what they wanted, they'd have told me a faster horse. He never said it, but it makes the point really eloquently, which is you think within your own world. And if you can break that apart, so in other words, you can look at your current process and ask where the pain is, then you can ask a supplier to say, show me how you'd fix that pain. And that then allows you to be able to play with the kit in the context of the problems and the challenges that you've got. And
Ralph, can I just add, just to add on the end of that, I would say the decision facing people in terms of kit. So back to the idea of procurement, you're at that point where you go, oh no, if I choose this system over that system, am I going to then find I made the mistake because it's process or for direct debits or whatever it isn't quite right? That's really changed for me, and it's much less of a precipice to choose a bit of tech, because it's frankly so good these days, the tech. You don't have to build all these weird and wonderful things hanging off in .NET and whatever. So it's much more about selecting the people you're going to work with, and so what you're testing is how flexible are these people to sort of meet me in the middle to solve problems, rather than have these people built a thing that is going to help me solve the problem.
Yes, do agree. John, I can see you've got your hand up. Would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, hi again. I just wanted to ask and observe that one of the common reasons that both in this role and in previous roles I've been involved in projects is because a previous project has failed.
Classic.
Yeah, and one of the challenges with that is that people, particularly in senior positions, who are worried about personal reputations and any association they have with the previous project, tend to be slightly distracted by a continuing session about making sure the next project doesn't fail. So do you have any tips for how you navigate that problem?
Yeah, John, so that is completely what I was talking about at the beginning of that false progress. So, again, let's use that word brutal. You've got a bunch of directors around a table. If something is starting to go off the rails, their primary driver isn't necessarily going to be how can I get this back on the rails. It's going to be how can I distance myself from this so it wasn't me that pushed it off the rails. And that is, I guess it's human nature. It's just a lot of things go like that. And so back to this kind of two hats thing with a board of people. That's where at the beginning I effectively get them to sign up to a charter. It's a job description that says you are here, through thick and thin. If things start going wrong, your job is to not be passive. It is to solve it. It's to get your hands dirty, and you will hit points where the problem is with your staff, and we are trusting you to be mature and live up to your director's title, your SMT title, to do something about that, rather than try and obfuscate, and make sure the problem is elsewhere. And there's two types of reaction to that. When I lay that on people, some of them go, yeah, no, totally on board with that, I can do that. And then you get the ones that go, oh, how dare you suggest I would behave in that way? And it's generally because, although they don't say it, they might well behave in that way, that they're saying that. The ones that are completely okay with it don't have, they wouldn't be that dodgy, let's say. And so it's a way to root things out at the very beginning, is to judge people's reaction to that question. And from my side, in terms of what I say to them in terms of how I manage the project, is, and we've got a slide on this in a second, of does your board know it's them who are responsible for the success? That's a really key thing. And I say, if this project goes wrong, if I've managed it wrong, it's because I've been giving you the wrong information with which to make decisions on. But if you agree I've been giving you accurate information, if it then goes wrong, it's the board that have screwed it up, not the project manager. And there's so many poor old people in PM roles who feel scared to report the truth because they don't want to get in a difficult situation, but you have to.
Yeah. Well, I would agree. There is nothing worse than hiding the true reality. If you hide the true reality, then there's no hope of fixing it, because you can't have a conversation about what needs to be done. So it's got to be honesty and transparency with the reporting. And one of the things that I would wholeheartedly recommend is that there's transparency of delivery. So being able to see what's going on day to day is really key. And I would say that's even more true with Agile. You tend to use things, stage gates work well in both Agile and Waterfall. But it's even more so true with Agile. I kind of argue it needs more discipline. Yeah. Whereas with Waterfall, you've got these kind of like almost ceremonial checkpoints that you don't get through.
I'll tell you just the last one, Ralph. Just John. So a typical I can't think of a project where I haven't said this at the outset in that kind of test of, are you sure you want to do this, SMT? I've said to people, look, I can already see an area where this will only be successful if you restructure your team and you get rid of some people that you know are problematic and won't be able to handle what's coming. Are you willing to do that restructure? Because if you're not, don't start the project. And that tends to get a pretty serious conversation going.
No, it's good. It's really sensible that you call out the hard things beforehand, and particularly with the change management, the restructuring. It can be a serious drag on any project. It doesn't necessarily kill them off, but it does make the final leg of it, the go live and the sustain and the getting the benefits and the value out of it, far more challenging.
Yeah.
Just before we move on, I just thought I'd pay a note to there's quite an active chat going on, which is absolutely fantastic. Just following on from the comment about the scenarios that came in, where people are saying it's difficult to sort of define the benefits, and people saying the big issues with the internal IT is, not getting the tangible benefits outside the IT department. People asking, the commenting on saying where the pain is, comments about me being very in the doctor's world with the pain, which I thought was quite amusing.
Yes.
Did come back and say, yes, this is true. I should really be talking about challenges and where people are finding it difficult or feeling unproductive. There's a few things in there about the people saying, oh, I've seen a shiny new piece of kit, and I wholeheartedly agree that that's not the way to procure. You may have seen something shiny, but really it should be driven by strategy. And then there's a conversation about, again, metrics. And one of the things that we would encourage, particularly if you're going for a continuous improvement model after you've done a project, is that the organizational strategy should lead to a set of KPIs that are monitoring the progress towards those strategic goals. Those KPIs that lead towards the strategic goals, they might be better member satisfaction, they better be an increase in members. There's typically a range of things that people are targeting as an organization, or if you're a charity, they may be fundraising, they may actually be even the proven value of the money that you give away. So when you're thinking about a project, don't think about the traditional metrics, because if you say what the success looks like, everybody will tell you on budget and on time. That's, from a supplier point of view, I'm not interested in that. That's my job. I'm interested in what does success look like for the organization at a strategic point of view, so that you can bake in the reporting at the start of the project to deliver KPIs around those. And then you can build the system around reporting those KPIs, because it's a great cross-check when somebody says, oh, I want feature X. Your product owner in the agile world would want to be able to say, yes, that feature is likely to improve that KPI. Yep. Yeah. It gives you something to hang your hat on to drive the value. And from a delivery point of view, that's what we're after. We're after being able to be held to account on something that is delivering value for the organization.
So it's a good question to ask, setting any of these things, is it measurable? No, it sounds obvious, but this goes back to my thing at the beginning about asking senior people to describe a future state rather than talk about a journey. Because if someone says, we will be the best that we can be, well, what is best?
Yeah.
How long's a piece of string?
Give me measurable. Yeah. And on that note, Aaron, I think we're just running a couple of minutes behind schedule, so let's move on.
Okay, should we go on to
the next section?
Okay, thank you, Ralph. So can people see my space beings again?
Check.
Yeah, okay. So do your project board realize it's them who are responsible for project success? A lot of what we've just been talking about actually after John's question there. So these are some real quotes I've got for you. Okay, so a sponsor once said to me, was I the sponsor of that project? It was a 250k project. It was 13 months to go live. And they made the comment after it had gone live because they'd read something on the intranet that said so-and-so project has successfully gone live as sponsored by them. And so they got in touch with me afterwards and they said, was I the sponsor? Now, this is, a bit more in my junior days here. And what I really should have done at the very outset was say, why on earth isn't the sponsor who's named a sponsor attending these sessions? And being hands-on and taking responsibility. But I was junior and I was, not as all the stuff I've just said. I just wanted to report green all the way, and luckily this one worked. But pretty shocking, really, that an organisation can be run and structured in such a way that someone who is tasked with owning a big change doesn't even know it was them. Someone just stuck their name on something. So there's one. And then please forgive my naff graphics. I do love rubbish pictures. But here's another problem. Nodding dog syndrome. This is what someone else actually said to me on a project. This project's about volunteer time, right? Now, it was well, it wasn't even a project. It was a 2.1 million program. It was over 2 years. And it was said to me at month 15 by a member of the board. And it was sort of about volunteer time, sort of, but not really. It was actually about giving a range of tools to help people deliver services better, but an offshoot of that would be that we would then have a track of the time that people had spent on things. So that was 15 months in, and I don't actually, in this scenario, I don't blame the person who said that, because another typical thing, there was lots of change at the senior level, lots of people coming and going, and so someone just said, oh, we need more people to bolster that program board. Terry or whoever, can you jump on and take part? So what was going on was wanting to show an impression of senior steering, but they weren't. They were basically just making up the numbers, and it took this poor soul quite a long time to pluck up the courage to go, what's this program on that I'm supposed to be governing again? So it's number one for me. It goes back to that thing of saying, sponsor, board, do you realise if this goes wrong, it's your fault, not the project manager's? Do you realise that why you've started this thing and what you're hoping to achieve out of it is down to you, not someone else? So it's the number one thing. If you haven't got a solid board, if you haven't got people that know why they should be there, then you stop the project. Sounds drastic, but I've done it before, where we've started something and I've said, actually, this is going to pause, and we're going to come back in 6 months and see if the organisation is more serious about doing it. Again, sounds scary and drastic, but if we, in that scenario, if we'd proceeded with it, it would have been a disaster because it just didn't have the the senior ownership. So I guess I'm interested. Does your place suffer from this? Have you tried, or has anyone else tried to address it? And where would people within the organisation think that a project is owned? So, for example, if it's to do with systems, or it's a system replacement, do they then automatically think it's an IT project? And I'll hand it over to the floor.
Just whilst people are mustering their questions, the conversation is continuing again, quite engaged on the chat, which is great, and people talking about the granularity of the KPIs, and it is a tough question. How do you get people to engage? One of the key things that we found, and just to bring it back to your point, Aaron, is that if someone is a project sponsor, then it should be directly affecting their area and their job. One of the biggest mistakes we see is the CFO becomes the sponsor, and they've no connection to the business process. But they're the sponsor. And this makes it incredibly difficult to get good KPIs, because they're not interested in the actual KPIs, because it doesn't correlate directly to their job. So one of the things that I would say is picking the person who is responsible, and their job description before the project is about achieving success in the area. will help you to have a conversation with them about what the KPIs are. Yeah.
And Ralph, I'd add to that one. So people tend to think of KPIs as something very high level that's derived by a strategic function. I like to actually, part of the KPIs I set on the very early slides about defining the benefits, etc. I had something in there about a very warts and all chat with the doers, the people on the ground, the system users, those that are facing the membership, etc. And some people would probably argue, oh, that's not a KPI, it's more of just a simple performance indicator, like can I complete this process a bit faster? But I'll give you an example of where you can turn it into a KPI is surveys. So I'm quite a fan of you talk to the real ground troops about what they're doing, so particularly member facing, and you say, what do the members grumble to you about? And so you get things like people saying, well, when they call up, they have to wait 30 seconds while the screen refreshes before I can enter their details. That's a massive deal for someone. Yes. So it might sound little, but actually you can start doing a survey there. You could start putting something together for your members that says, how happy are you with the interaction when you call our organization? Rate it 1 to 10.
Yeah.
And then you say, well, what's our KPI going to be then? Well, that's interesting. Our results say that it's a 5. Our KPI is we want that an 8.
Yes.
Yeah, and that hasn't come from theorizing with a senior group. It's come from talking to people on the ground about what they think the members are going through, and then you ask the members to rate it.
Yeah, and it does really help. And I just noticed another comment which I think is worth echoing because it's really important. Project sponsorship is not about riding people, it's about supporting the project, and that is absolutely true. The point of having the executive person on the board is that you get the engagement, and when things get stuck, particularly we find cross-departmental challenges, you need somebody that spreads across those departments to unstick them. So, for example, when a process transitions from, say, website to customer service to finance, then there might be 3 different silos in which that's working. And just a silly little example is the testing. We need that to be joined up. We need to know that process. And when you're doing your process testing, when a section or an area is delivered, you need all of those people to understand it. One of the classics we've had on a project is, oh no, I didn't test it because it wasn't set up in the way that I needed it to be. We're like, but didn't talk to the person. They're like, no, I don't talk to those people over there. And we needed the authority for them to say, well, actually, the 3 people from those departments, let's get you in a room and do it together.
Yeah.
And unsurprisingly, it happened after that, but we needed the authority because you didn't have the person to do it from a single department, which is a shame.
So I had a really nice quote, Ralph, from a chief exec in the past, where they said, we're not so much in silos. We've just got these very thin kind of plastic sheets between us, but no one's bothered prodding the sheet. So it wasn't a kind of a defensive thing. It's just no one had thought about it. Yeah. And that real world example from that organization, that chief exec, I did, again, this sort of horizontal business analysis, not just looking at the area that you're changing something on.
Yeah.
And I spoke to one team that said, we produce this report every week and we hand it to this other department. We don't know what they do with it, but they need it, so we produce it. So I went and spoke to the other department, and they said, every week the team from this other department, they give us this report weekly. We don't know why they give it to us, so we just stick it in a drawer. And so I got the 2 together and said, should you just stop running that report? And they went, yeah. No big deal. It was just pushing on those little plastic dividers and getting people to talk to each other.
Brilliant. No, I mean it's. I'm just noticing one comment that it's from David Scott saying that the first thing to be cut back when a project is running late.
Yeah.
It's just I'm flabbergasted at that one. That one.
But it's so true. It's so true.
Yeah. I mean that is you might get live quicker, but I wouldn't want to be on the other side of that go live.
No, but it's classic. It's that classic. oh my gosh, I'm a project manager, I don't want to report upwards that there's suddenly a problem because the build is taking longer than we thought. Never. So I'm going to cut the testing in half, but it will be okay because I get to tick the box saying we've completed something. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, no, it is challenging. Right, should we move on to our next section?
Yeah, so I've got my last one here. Hopefully you can see a little green radar.
Yes.
Yep. So this one is why the most important person on the project is the one who says they don't know what's going on. So this is, again, I'm dead serious here, and you'll see why in a sec. So this little radar here is my NAF image to show you the biggest job of a project manager, in my view, which is risk spotting and mitigating them. And there's all sorts of risks, like we've just talked about, like will we end up overrunning on the build, so we cut the testing, etc. But people, I tend to find, are the biggest risk to project success. And I'm going to give you, again, not attributed to any individuals or organizations, but I'm going to give you some real examples here of what some people have said. So this is someone who, when I said, we've got to nail down the design, I'm going to go and talk to the users about what they like, they said, oh, don't ask the users, they don't know what they need. And this person had identified themselves as the expert on what a system which was going to be used by around 14,000 members day in, day out for what they needed to do. It was a real operational 9 to 5, or if you're a doctor, 24-hour thing. And they said, don't go and ask them because they don't know what they need. And that was a massive risk for me, that one. Here's another one. Finance director, I think this is the CFO that Ralph was talking about. We've mapped all our processes, they don't need looking at. So that was the really defensive, Ralph's point earlier about getting these different groups to talk to each other about their testing. That was a really defensive finance director who was effectively saying, don't come sniffing around my property, get off my lawn, kind of thing. And I don't care if your project's a success or not, you're not coming and looking at my processes, even though my team have to interact with some of the other people here. And then the third one, again, this is a real one. We can save you X million per year by closing a range of these premises. To which I and some other people said, wow, well, that's good. Can you show me how you work that out? What were the workings? And they literally said in a meeting, we haven't got any. We just know this would happen. And that was from one of the big four consultants. Again, I won't say who, but what we're talking here, this is your Accentures, your PwCs, your McKinseys, your it's that sort of level, Ernst & Young's. Someone from one of those groups, when asked to show how closing a whole load of premises would save us millions a year, they said, oh, we can't show you, we just think it will happen. And so what I'm trying to highlight here is these are people that think they're the most important person on your project, or maybe more accurately, they think they have the most authority on how your project should proceed, but they're actually massive risks because they don't really know what they're talking about, and they're not getting, Ralph was talking about the true value, that they have an opinion of what's valuable to them, which is generally their own opinion, or it's progressing their own commercial business if they're sitting outside your organization, like our third one, or it's them protecting their turf, and it's actually got nothing to do with the value of your project. So let me show you two very different now people who were brave enough to admit they didn't know what was going on, and they didn't have the egos of the three examples that I've just given you. So here you go. Here's a CEO. And this goes back to the benefits thing. So genuine quote, I was talking about starting up a project, talking about, program, talking about the roles that people would have to have on the board level. And in front of everyone else, the CEO said, do you know what? I don't really even know what you mean by measuring benefits. I don't know what you're talking about. Is this KPIs? Is this, I can now do this bit of work quicker? And I said, well, it's sort of it, but it's a bit bigger than that. It's a bit more strategic. And so they said at the outset of this, they said, look, if I'm going to do this properly, I'm going to need to understand what you're talking about, because I don't get this. So can someone help me understand, as the sponsor of this thing, what I need to be doing here to make it successful? And if they hadn't said that, and this goes back to, I think Shan was flagging the issue earlier about people getting into these senior positions who shouldn't necessarily be there. I would, from my experience, I wouldn't have heard someone say that comment at a large organization, but because of the size of the organization and the trust that they had at the SLT level, they felt they were able to say that, and so they said it, and they said to their management team and some more junior people around the table, does anyone know how we crack this? So that was so important, that level of honesty from the top of the organisation, and it helped us avoid basically just going in the wrong direction. Here's another one. Again, real one. This very junior person who got asked to be involved in a project a while ago, and they attended a few project meetings, and then they came to me and they said, I really don't know what's going on. I'm really out of my depth. I don't think I should be here. And so I said, well, what is it? What is it that's making you feel that? And they said, oh, it's all the jargon that people talk, and it's all like the kind of everyone sounds like that they're really experts. I feel like I'm not an expert. And I said, listen, junior team member, I absolutely need non-experts for running the risk of sounding like Michael Gove here. Who needs experts? I've got enough of those. I've got them coming out of my ears. What I need on this board and in this group of people is actually people that can say, well, I don't really know what you're talking about with all of this tech process, this, that, benefits mumbo jumbo, but I know if you tried that in my little office squirreled away in one corner of the organization, it just wouldn't work for these reasons. And so I guess what I'm saying with this one is the two people at the bottom are dead honest, and they're dead honest about what they don't know. But in bringing that honesty, they absolutely avoid you running a risk, of a risk becoming, a real thing. Whereas our characters at the top three are massive risks, because they'll never admit that they don't know something, or that that their input might not actually be as objective as they think. So here's a question to people: what ratio of know-it-alls have you got to useful people, as I've just shown you on that slide? Do you think people in your organisation are comfy admitting that they're ignorant? Would they be brave, like my two people, whether it's at the very senior or the very junior end? And I've put this delicately, I think, does your culture welcome managing upwards? So that's if you're in a scenario where you have to say to a senior, look, with respect, you don't really know what's going on, and you need to drop the ego a bit. How do you think that would go down? Or has it gone down? So I'll switch out of presenter mode.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Just whilst you're kind of mustering yourselves with your questions as well, I'll add a little bit of commentary. It is, in our experience, really surprising where the insights come from on a project. I would say that whenever we meet or we get to a new client, it's never the people you first think it is. Yeah, there's there's so many things you could say about not judging a book by a cover, but I would absolutely encourage everybody. We talk about domain experts, and we actively encourage at the start of a process what we call a project organization map, so a project org chart. And that project org chart needs to include the sponsor at the top, and then it needs to work its way down to the actual people on the ground. And we want to know who those are at the start of the project to make sure we've got that full range. And it's amazing who steps up to the plate. It really is. You get some really insightful questions from the most junior people, and that's what leads to some of the best process improvements, or, as Aaron says, do you not making some of the biggest mistakes? Because if a system can't be used or even understood by the people on the ground, it's useless.
Yeah. And Ralph, that goes back to on the enterprise architecture thing where I was talking about that relationship between apps and data. Yeah. I've had scenarios where people have said, this is the ideal data set we need to gather. And my background as a DBA, when I started out, I would have gone, well, then that's what we need to gather. And it doesn't matter if people have a hard time entering it into the app, they just need to do it. And then I found out the real hard way, that you build something that captures loads of data. And if it's not usable, they literally won't use it. And organizations then go on about, you need to change the culture to make people more open to change, blah, blah, blah. No. A lot of the time, you've just made something unusable. Yeah,
no, it's true. And, we're fortunate enough to have a full sort of UX team as well. And it's the same if you're building it for an internal team. But they wax lyrical about the correlation between the amount of data you ask for and the amount of data you actually capture.
Yeah.
And they're inversely proportional. You know, if I ask you simply for an email sign up, I'd probably get it. If I ask you for your email, your date of birth, your telephone number, your address, and your hair color on a Tuesday, you know, I probably get none of it. But you know, it is really key that each of those things are thought about, and particularly when you're working with your users, giving them an open and easy forum to feedback. You know, and if I would say anything about the culture, it's that openness, so that anybody can speak up at any point in the project.
Yeah, indeed.
And just think I've got a comment in the chat from Kitty, saying that a problem we have is the more useful people tend to be in jobs that don't give them much time to be part of a project / board group. They are already very busy doing their everyday tasks, and managers are reluctant to let them join.
Yeah. I mean, it's back to this false progress thing. You know, you can start out by going, hey, you'd make a great product owner. Let's get you to do that on top of your day job without making any changes. And it's just, you know, it becomes disastrous because that person gets completely overworked and they do two things badly. So this part of your planning, and it's back to that that honesty thing with your leadership at the beginning, is to say, if we do this, function X that you've got is going to need to be backfilled to a certain extent, and we need your best people out. They're the ones that we need. So you need to think about what you're going to do without your best people, and it's really important to formalize things like this. So I have a general rule of thumb that if it's going to be over 50% of someone's time, you basically have to go to their job description and say you don't do your job anymore. You do a different job for a period of time. If it's, I don't know, 25% of someone's time, it might be a less formal thing, but it's still a negotiation, and it's something, if not written in these digital days, it's something formally confirming back from line management, this person will be released for this amount of time for this project, because they'll always say yes to it, and then you get into the heat of things and they say sorry, no. So you need to formalize it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and this goes back to the job of the senior project sponsor. You know, this is the bit where the senior project sponsor can say, no, this is an important project, and you know, we authorize you to backfill, and that's something that people don't often take account of when they're thinking about project cost. You know, they look at the external costs, and they look at the internal, maybe project management costs, but they sort of miss the backfill costs for bringing the right people to the party.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, Peter's just chipped in with he thinks that honesty seems much more prevalent in junior roles. Tough for seniors to admit a lack of knowledge, as some believe they should know everything about everything. And this is true. It is, and that's a tough one, because it's partly about culture. But I think as a project manager, or as a person leading a project, then you can encourage the culture that kind of says, well, you know, lots of us don't know bits about this project, and we'll come to a project and say, right, we do know the tech, we do know our process. Right at this point in time, we don't claim to know your business. So if we're not asking you things and getting them wrong, something's wrong. So please bear with us. We're going to ask you lots of stupid questions, because our job is to understand quickly. And if we say something wrong, we want correction. That's really important. You can openly say, oh, hang on a minute, you got that wrong.
I've got a question for our group, if I can, Ralph, which hopefully it's just a sort of a thumbs up or down. But how many people have been involved in projects where the supplier has had someone on the board? Anyone had that? No. Okay, that's interesting.
It's an open prerequisite request for us to be on the project board.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, I'm quite surprised about that. We're sort of coming to a little bit towards the close, so I'll just check with the floor if there's any other questions they wanted to get in before we start to wind up. No? Okay. In which case, I'll sort of move over to sort of closing comments. Would you like to sort of add a little summary, Aaron?
I hope the group have found it interesting. I hope I don't sound too horrible and brutal in my approach, and that it is for good organisational progress reasons. And if there's anything, I mean, I'm very happy, Ralph and Felinesoft, if you want to share my email, I'm very happy if anyone wants to get in touch post this. I've always got something normally harsh to say about something or other, so I'm happy to carry on that. But yeah, I just hope people have found it interesting. And, you know, if there's one thing you do, try and evolve that sense of being open to challenge. This is a real problem that I've had between small orgs versus big orgs. Small orgs are great for saying, tell me what I don't know so I can mature a bit. Big orgs tend to go, there's nothing new you can tell me. So if there's any of those that are in the bigger, or as Shan said, very small ones that suffer from the same thing, if you can promote the idea of actually it's showing really good leadership, if you say, I don't know something, help me out, and let's have an honest chat, that's where the best results come from.
Great. Cheers. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you for joining us today. Aaron, thank you for speaking. It's really appreciated. We will contact you all and we'll drop out the narrative contact details. And if anyone would like a copy of today's video, just let us know. Excellent.
Okay. Thanks for joining, everybody.
Cheers. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Aaron. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.